Hello, this is Cho of the Shiny Colors Discord. Welcome to another episode of The Shiny Review. Today we've got a ton of cards to talk about, so let's not waste any time and get started. We have a new produced SSR for Yuika alongside support SSRs for Madoka, Chiyoko, Rinzai, and Kogane. We're going to start off chronologically with Madoka, who is a visual support. This card is part of a new series where the gimmick is that by maxing out the card at 4 stars, you get access to a time-exclusive title, as well as alternate card art. The art, I believe, is not time-limited, but the title is. So, if you're somebody that really wants that alternate art or the title, now's basically your only time to go for this Madoka. She's visual support that has access to Visual Mastery Visual, reaching plus 15 at level 75, otherwise plus 12 at level 65. She has Tension Mastery Visual Limit Up, which is plus 4 at level 80, otherwise plus 3 at level 70, plus 2 at level 60. She has Visual Stay Mastery, reaching plus 5 at level 80, plus 3 at level 70, and Visual Mastery Stamina, reaching plus 5 at level 80, plus 3 at level 65. Her masteries are fine. The Visual Mastery Visual doesn't feel too great nowadays, but the rest of it is pretty passable. She has 2 appeals. The first at 0 stars is a Visual 2.5 that fortifies your visual buffs and grants a 20% visual buff for 4 turns. The 4-star appeal is a Visual 3.5 that fortifies your visual buffs and grants a 60% visual buff for 4 turns. Her 1-star passive is a Visual 50% up if it's turn 3 or earlier, and it has a 20% chance to activate up to 3 times. Her 2-star passive is a Visual 85% up and Memory Gauge 5% up if you have 2 or less total units on your team. So that would mean either running Nocchill or something like Antika or Hokuto where they only have 1 unit. This has a 30% chance to activate up to twice. Her 4-star passive is a Visual 150% up if you are in the center position, and it has a 30% chance to activate up to twice. Her total uncap is a plus 250 to visual. Madoka is okay, and may be seen in Producers Cup teams thanks to not having any commies at all, saving you a little bit of time. The claim to fame with this new series, as mentioned before, is the special title and the alternate artwork. So, I would only really recommend pulling for this card if you really like Madoka. I think she's solid, but not necessarily strong enough to say that this is a super crazy card. It's just here if you're a really big Madoka fan. And the same is probably going to ring true for basically every other support like this for everybody else as they get one. Moving right along then, we have Yuika, who is a pure vocal unit. Her initial appeal is a vocal 4.0 that ignores interest and grants a vocal 30% buff for 4 turns and attention 50% down for 4 turns. The plus appeal, which requires 4 or more Antika in your skill history, is a vocal 50% up for 4 turns. The 4-star appeal is a vocal 5.0 that ignores interest, grants a 60% vocal buff for 4 turns, and a 50% attention down buff for 4 turns. The plus appeal has the same condition, 4 or more Antika in skill history, for a vocal 50% buff for 4 turns. Her 1-star passive is a vocal 60% up if it's turn 2 or earlier, and it has a 35% chance to activate once. Her 2-star passive is a vocal 120% up if you have 1 or more attention down buffs. This has a 25% chance to activate twice. Her 4-star passive is a vocal 150% up that requires 1 or more attention down buffs and your current mental to be below 74%. This has a 25% chance to activate twice. Her total uncap is a plus 400 to vocal. Her memory appeal, once maxed out, is a vocal 3.0 that links into a vocal max 3.5 that scales based on how low your current attention is. I don't really know how to feel about this Yuika personally. In concept, she fits in with the vibes of vocal Antika pretty well, what with her interest ignore and solid attention down passives. That said, the vocal buffs feel extremely out of place in contrast, and she's ultimately not doing enough to feel all that impactful for the team. Now, as a center, however, she's one of the strongest options they've got right now, and pairs up really well with cards that have the charge appeal effect, so your Pericole cards, for some free points and a little bit of extra damage. As a unit, I would say she's a pretty easy B+, maybe A- if you want to stretch it. Otherwise, I think that she's a very solid center at an S. I think she's very good for that specifically. So next then, we have Choco, who is a vocal support. Her masteries include Unit Mastery SP, reaching plus 12 at level 75, otherwise plus 8 at level 65. Unit Mastery Vocal Limit Up, reaching plus 5 at level 75, otherwise plus 4 at level 70, plus 2 at level 60. She has Vocal Stay Mastery, reaching plus 5 at level 80, otherwise plus 3 at level 70, and Vocal Mastery Stamina, reaching plus 5 at level 80, plus 3 at level 65. I'd say her masteries are solid. They're about what you would expect nowadays for a support of her caliber. The Vocal Uncap being plus 5 at max can be very potent if you are running all of Hokuto, as you are getting an additional plus 5 for every Hokuto member in the room alongside Choco. So your first pairing would be plus 5, If you have 3 in there, that's plus 10, all the way up to plus 20. As for the rest of what Choco does, her initial appeal is a Vocal 3.0 that grants you a 50% attention up buff for 2 turns. The 4-star appeal is a Vocal 4.0 that grants a Vocal 30% buff for 3 turns and attention 50% up for 3 turns. Her 1-star passive is a Vocal 50% up if Choco is on your team, and it has a 20% chance to activate up to 3 times. Her 2-star passive is a Vocal 135% up if you have 2 or more attention up buffs. This has a 25% chance to activate twice. Her 4-star passive is a Vocal 100% up if you are in the center position, and it has a 20% chance to activate once. Her total stat uncapped is a plus 250 to Vocal. Choco, I think, is very solid, but not for everybody. She's a direct upgrade from Safari Choco, at the cost of having a harder to use 2-star passive. Safari Choco only needs 1 attention up buff, while this Choco needs 2. Now, this can be circumvented almost entirely if you use Choco's last permanent Produce SSR, who has the ability to double stack attention on 1 appeal. But you can't use this Choco support alongside a Choco Produce, so you'd have to build around that on your other characters in order to make use of this effect. I will say that she will be a pretty decent upgrade to Vocal Hokuda if you are taking the route of attention up. If you are somebody that's not really focused on that particularly, this card is probably not going to do a lot for you outside of the masteries. So I would say that she's a card that's absolutely not for everybody, but for those that have bought into the attention up buffs again, this card seems very solid for what they're trying to do. I would give this card a fairly easy A tier. She's not super crazy, and not for everybody, but it's a card that's certainly worth it if you build around it. Now, we're not done just yet, however, because we also have this Rinzai that we voted upon a while ago, alongside Hana and Toru. This is also a vocal support. Her masteries include Vocal Mastery SP, reaching plus 12 at level 75, otherwise plus 9 at level 65. She has Vocal Mastery Vocal Limit Up, reaching plus 4 at level 80, plus 3 at level 70, plus 2 at level 60. Excellent Boost, which is plus 5 at level 80, otherwise plus 3 at level 70, and Vocal Mastery Stamina, reaching plus 5 at level 80, otherwise plus 3 at level 65. I would say this is a pretty good assortment of masteries. They're generic enough with some appreciated stamina, as always. The Excellent Boost can certainly help for building, though I do kinda wish she had a Vocal Stay mastery in there, just to really help since everything that she has is focused around the vocal room. She does have 2 appeals, the first being a generic Vocal 3.0. The second is a Vocal 3.5 that grants the random effect of the following. A Vocal 50% buff for 4 turns, Evasion 20% up for 4 turns, Passive Activation rate up of 5% for 3 turns, or +1 mulligan. For her passives, her 2-star passive is a Vocal 120% up if either Rinzai, Hana, or Toru are on your team, and it has a 15% chance to activate twice. Her 4-star passive is a Vocal 100% up if you are in the vocal position, and has a 20% chance to activate once. Her total stat uncapped is plus 250 to vocal. New Rinzai is okay, but it's kind of a mixed bag. Her masteries are okay, as mentioned before, her passives aren't really all that crazy, but generic, and her appeal is really clunky. I would say of the buffs, Comedic is probably the one that cares the most about these, as you would like the passive activation rate up, and you'd like the mulligan, since that's kind of what your team is sort of dependent on. Nocchill doesn't necessarily mind the evasion, of course. The mulligan is fine, and Hokuda really only care about the mulligan. So I would say that this card is maybe the most useful on Vocal Comedic or Vocal Nocchill. Vocal Hokuda, you do have some reasonably good options that are very similar to this card that maybe will work out a bit better. So it's really up to you. I would give this card a pretty easy B to B+. And finally, we'll be wrapping things up with the Grade Fest support this time around, which is Kogane. She's a pure dance support that has access to a couple unique masteries, mostly Dance Mastery SP, reaching plus 12 at level 75, otherwise plus 6 at level 55, Dance Mastery Dance Limit Up, reaching plus 3 at level 70, and Know-How Discovery Mastery, reaching plus 4 at level 80, otherwise plus 1 at level 65. Her passives and appeals aren't that particularly notable outside of the 3% passive activation rate up for 5 turns on her upgraded appeal, which is a Dance 2.8. But otherwise, her passives aren't really all that special. The Dance 65% up requires you to have a passive activation rate buff on you, with a 30% chance to activate once. So, use the final appeal, then you have access to the 65. Really not all that crazy, but is at least some level of synergy. Overall, Kogane is not a card you're necessarily going to be running for Fest. This isn't too surprising. But, just be aware of how helpful Know-How Discovery Mastery can be. How this works is that when you produce in any mode that isn't Step, Know-How Discovery Mastery increases the likelihood of abilities dropping during the run. So the books you get at the end may have more abilities than normal if you bring along a card like Kogane. But again, remember that the ability is maxed out if you max out the card. You still have plenty of time to get copies of this card since she was just recently added, so save up your Grade Fest coins as you can and buy as many copies as possible. And that will do it for the video today. Thank you so much as always for watching. Next time we'll be talking about the upcoming banner, which is a new Produce SSR for Koito. It seems like it'll be a permanent SSR, so I don't expect a whole lot from it, but maybe the card itself will be pretty interesting. We'll just have to see. Till then, I've been Cho. Thank you so much as always for watching. Have a wonderful rest of your day.